in the singing of our national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleam, whose rush lights and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streamed, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
While we have the Yom, you can sit. While we have the Yom Ha'Shoah programs every year, and we hear from survivors, as the years go by, it's hard to believe that it's been over 80 years since the beginning of the Shoah. So every once in a while, I think it's important, besides lighting candles and hearing from a survivor, that we remember those who did not make it, and also what it was like when America really saw firsthand what the Shoah was all about. 3 years ago, I read a very powerful and illuminating article written by Meir Soloveitchik, the rabbi of the Congregation Sheretz Yisrael in New York City and the director of the Strauss Center for Torah and Western Thought at Yeshiva University in Commentary magazine, with a heading, "The Best Revenge." The article, written around the 75th anniversary of the Allied liberation of the concentration camps, recalls the moment through the eyewitness accounts of two members of the American military of vastly different ranks, backgrounds, and faiths. One is Dwight David Eisenhower, the supreme commander of all the Western forces in Europe, and the other a lieutenant, Meyer Birnbaum, a young Orthodox Jew from New York. Birnbaum served in General Georges Patton's Third Army that entered Ohrdruf and Buchenwald. Today, I would like to concentrate on Eisenhower's take and position when he arrived at Buchenwald, since quite often many non-Jews over the years have felt bad about the Shoah, but have done little thereafter. Eisenhower entered Ohrdruf with Generals Patton and Omar Bradley. Patton grew queasy and refused to enter certain parts of the camp, but Eisenhower insisted on examining every inch. He then insisted that all Germans in the area be brought to look upon what their people had brought about. But it was not only Nazism, not only Germans. Eisenhower wanted to see in Ohrdruf and Buchenwald. He wanted American forces to see it as well. He said that while American soldiers serving overseas might not have known exactly what they were fighting for, at least now they know what they're fighting against. And in a letter to Army Chief of Staff, General George Marshall said, "I made the visit deliberately in order to be in a position to give firsthand evidence of these things. If ever in the future there develops a tendency to change and charge these allegations to propaganda." Thus did Eisenhower predict the phenomenon of the Holocaust denial decades before it began. He added in the cable to Marshall that it was not only American soldiers who needed to bear witness to Nazi evil, but also the political leadership of the United States. He asked about a dozen leaders of Congress and a dozen prominent editors of newspapers to make a short visit to see the evidence of bestiality and cruelty so overpowering as to leave no doubt in their minds about the normal practices of the Germans in these camps. While the concentration camps themselves are only half of what Nazism and the German hierarchy brought upon the Jews of this world, they serve as possibly the best and longest reminder outside of the survivors, since some of these camps are still open to the public in Europe today. Memory, war, vengeance, all of Eisenhower's reactions to the Holocaust are important and vital. And that is why we have annual Yom Ha'Shoah programs, so as survivors like myself and others whom we have listened to and continue to listen to today start to disappear. But we are still energized to make sure no one forgets, and our eternal continuity of the Jewish people and our faith in God continues, along with our linking generation to generation as we exhibit by being here today. As has been our custom over the years, we have memorial candles laid out to memorialize the 6 million who perished in the Shoah. I would like to first call up any of the survivors in our gathering here tonight to light a candle. I think it behooves us to stand and applaud these survivors who have gone through so much to build their lives and are still with us today. Next, I would like to call upon the children of survivors to light a candle. Think of this as you see them and the next generations lighting candles. The survivors not only survived and rebuilt their lives, but gave birth to many future generations. I would like to now call upon the next generation, the grandchildren of survivors and the great-grandchildren of survivors and any of their relatives with us this evening. Thank you. I now call on Rabbi Josh Brody to introduce our featured speaker this evening.
It's really an honor and a privilege to be here tonight with all of you on such a special evening. Yom Ha'Shoah is not usually an event which I'm usually here in Boca. For almost the last 20 years, every year, I've had the privilege of being on the video screen with many of the members of our community, students, the high school students that were currently in different yeshivas, public schools, private schools in our community. We had a chance to broadcast live from Poland. Tonight I'm here in person. I want to acknowledge first Rabbi Goldberg, who can't be here tonight. He's actually just flying to Israel. I don't even know if he's landed yet to make a shiva call to the D family. He's currently mourning the loss of 3 very precious souls, and of course to Rabbi Moskowitz, who's in the back right now, joining us this evening. It's a very, very important night for all of us. Tonight, we have a chance to hear from a real hero, someone that I've had the chance to know and get to know for the last 7 years. Traveled together on the March of the Living. The March of the Living, which has been an experience like no other. Where else do you get a chance to march? And many of you in this room have been on the experience, as many of the teenagers of our community. Where else do you get to march from Auschwitz to Birkenau on Yom Ha'Shoah? March with 15,000 people from around the world, more than 60 or 70 countries. But what makes the March of the Living so important and so significant in the lives of so many of those who have participated is the fact that we get to travel with survivors. You can go to Poland tomorrow, but I'm pretty sure you won't get the chance to travel with a survivor. And when you get a chance to bring survivors on the buses to tell us their firsthand experience about what it was like for them, that creates an experience which is simply unforgettable. You can't duplicate that. You can't read that in a textbook, and you can't watch that on a movie. To walk through camps like Auschwitz, Majdanek, and Treblinka, and in a place like Majdanek where you can see the barracks and you can see the gas chambers, and a survivor can point and say, not only was that my barrack, but that was my bunk that you're looking at right now. And as it becomes harder and harder for our local survivors to travel with us, we're able to use technology over the years to try and bring them into the experience, bringing an iPad so that they could come in live when we were walking around, but it's still not the same. Many of the survivors that we've heard in past years at Boca Raton Synagogue were survivors that we had the chance of developing relationships with on the March of the Living. People like the legends of our community, like Norman Frajman, Sam Ron, Rosette Goldstein, Mary and Joe Eckstein. I can even think about some of the last few Yom Ha'Shoah programs that we had in our community where I get a phone call right after the program or an email saying, where do they live? My children or my grandchildren would love to meet with the people that just spoke. And when I had a chance to call Ayala and say, guess who's speaking at this year's Yom Ha'Shoah program at BRS? She said, who is it? I said, it's Sam Schleider. She says, I love Sam. She traveled together with us in 2017. I said, tell me a little bit about what you remember. She said, you have to know that Sam is such a sweet man. She says, I remember walking around the camps, and she sent me a whole slew of pictures I just shared with Sam. Her and Sam walking around the different camps. She says, I just spoke to one of my best friends. I spoke to Shoshana Galish. Her parents are here tonight. And Shoshana shared the following story that she remembers you telling her. She says, when you travel through these camps, you got to remember that this is not the way it looked. You see, the difference between what you're seeing today and what we saw back then. Today, you see this beautiful grass. It almost looks like a park. I'll never forget when we were traveling through Majdanek one year. We saw a family riding on their bicycles through the camp. Because today it's like a park. Majdanek. It's the Central Park in Poland, in Lublin. So there's a difference between the park that you see today and the place that we lived in. Because today you see grass and you see trees. But back then there wasn't a blade of grass, Shoshana said. She said, because if there was a blade of grass, Sam told her, we would have eaten it. So tonight on Yom Ha'Shoah, similar to what we just experienced on Pesach, it's not just an opportunity for us to memorialize an event that took place a long time ago, but it's a chance to listen to someone and relive that experience. For me, the most exciting part, I will say exciting, was a chance that we had just a few minutes before this event began. Sam's not a member of Boca Raton Synagogue. I don't think Sam's ever been here before. But we were talking and reminiscing and shared a book that he had just written. Talking about where he grew up. You're going to hear about it. Where he moved to, where he moved from to the next stage of his life. And he says, you know, I'm not Orthodox, but I've got a sister who's Orthodox. I said, you do? Yeah, where's she live? She lives in a place called Teaneck. I said, Teaneck? Your sister lives in Teaneck? Tells me her name. I don't recognize the name. I said, what's her last name? Says, Kamenetsky. Kamenetsky, one second. Kamenetsky from Teaneck. Your sister married a Kamenetsky from Teaneck? Jerry Kamenetsky's brother married your sister? Where's Jerry? Right over here. It's Mishpacha. You're part of our Mishpacha. We called your brother a few minutes before the program and we spoke to him. I said, where do you go to shul? He says, B'nai Yeshurun. I said, I'm a rabbi. Grew up in B'nai Yeshurun. What a small world. And if that wasn't enough for everyone tonight as we get to hear from Sam, we were talking about where he grew up, Poland, and you're going to hear about Poland, and you hear about Italy. What happened in Italy? And you're going to hear about the Lower East Side. And he said he went to yeshiva at a place called RJJ. And Danny Hiller walks in, and Danny Hiller says, 1 second, Sam Schleider, class of 50, 55? Haven't seen each other almost 70 years, classmates from the Lower East Side in RJJ. It's not just a photo of a Holocaust survivor. It's not just a chapter in another book. It's a member of our family. I'll never forget the words that Rabbi Yisrael Meir Lau taught us on Yom HaShoah at the ceremony in Birkenau. He said 6 million is an impossible number to fathom. It's just too big. You can't count to 6 million. You can't imagine 6 million. But you know what you can do? You can learn the story of one survivor. You can learn the story of one person that was murdered. And you can think about it 6 million times. This Yom HaShoah, that one survivor tonight is Sam Schleider. And we're going to think about you tonight. And we're going to think about you tomorrow. And we're going to learn your story, and we're going to tell your story. Because that's what we do here on this special day of Yom HaShoah. So I'd like to invite, first of all, everyone please rise as we welcome Sam.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're going to sit down.
Oh my goodness, look at all the people here. I didn't expect such a crowd, but I'm going to tell you, my life was not easy. I was born in 1937. I was 4 years old when the war started. I was 6 years old when we went into the ghetto. We didn't have too much food in the ghetto, but we survived the ghetto. My father had a business, scrap metal business, which the Germans allowed him to continue using it. The business was right adjacent to the ghetto. Once the ghetto got smaller, and they had to hang all those capos on the poles. My mother, who was an angel, took me by the hand and she said, "Come, look, remember, and don't forget." What I saw in the ghetto, I don't forget and I remember. After the ghetto, we went into hiding. We went to my father's business. In the middle of the night, we went to this Christian lady who put us in a basement. And we were there for 18 months. We had no television, no radio, no paper. Could you stay in a place for 18 months without your cell phone? I doubt it. Anyway, we survived until the Germans left the area and the Russians liberated us in 1945. My father...
We're going to be here for a while, so I want you to sit down. I don't want you to get too tired here.
It's okay,
You
I
sure?
could stand.
Okay, I know it's going to be an interview, but I think you're okay right now.
I
Give you the
survived
stage.
the worst, but I just want you people to realize survival, the instinct of survival is the greatest instinct that the humans have. We have two instincts, the instinct to survive and the instinct to reproduce. And you do anything to survive. You eat grass, you eat tree barks. And in those concentration camps where they have no food, people ate those things. Mice, rats, whatever they found, they ate. You eat anything just to survive. And believe me, it wasn't easy. When I was 18 months, a child in a hidden basement, I had no television, no food. I had one slice of bread a day with a little water. The water was basically rainwater, and I survived. And not only I survived, a lot of people survived in the forest, in the fields, and they survived any way they can. Nothing was easy. And believe me, I was too young to realize how bad it was. But I survived and I continue surviving. And here I have some pictures when I was 8 years old. We left Poland because anti-Semitism was too great in Poland. We hitchhiked and we went all the way south of Poland. We reached Czechoslovakia. And there, my new father, because my old father was killed by the Nazis, and my father met Israeli soldiers who were fighting with the English army, and any Jew that they found. Excuse me, I get a lot of emotions when I talk about it. Any Jew that they found, they said, go south, go to Naples, go to Bari, take the ship Exodus and go to Israel. And we finally reached Bologna, and the train that normally would hold 600 to 700 people had over 10,000 people. People were on top of the roof. People that was in between the trains. I was watching people putting planks underneath the train so they could really go like that. And yet the train left, and my mother took one look at the train and she said, there's no way I could get on that train. She was pregnant with my sister, and we stayed in Italy for 5 years. I speak perfect Italian. I went to school there, and I could speak Italian with anybody that wants to speak with me. My sister is born in Italy. When I go to schools, I tell I have an Italian sister, and all of a sudden they jump up and says, I thought you were Jewish. How could you have an Italian sister? So I had to explain to them there's a difference between religion and a nationality. And now they understand. My sister, who was born in Italy, she lives here in Teaneck, New Jersey, and she is Orthodox, and she has 4 children who are all in medical fields. You know, when I talk about my history, I get emotional, and it took me 60 years before I even mentioned how I lived. I have no idea why it took me so long, but I speak to some other survivors, and they all said the same thing. Even if you are not a survivor, you should leave a legacy to your children and to your grandchildren and how you lived. When I came to the United States, I had no idea what a Jew was because my parents wanted to keep me alive. They did not instill me the Jewishness that normally you would tell your children. Anyway, we moved to the Lower East Side of Manhattan on Essex Street. And my father, my new father, who is my stepfather, but I call him my father, took me to a yeshiva, which is around the corner. And he said to the head rabbi, you see the boy pointing to me? If you don't take him in, he'll grow to be a Gentile. So they took me in and they put me in the first class. Here I am, 13 years old with 6th grade, and my friends next to me was 6 years in age, and I survived, and I was able to, after 5 years, to graduate, and I passed the Regents the English Regents. I went to college for 2 years. When I was first moved to the United States, I had no socks. You know how I wore my shoes? I took some schmatted road and I wrapped around my feet and I put my shoes in there. I had no underwear. I had no idea what an underwear was. We take things for granted and don't forget it's not easy to take some of the things that we have now. We have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Could you live on one slice of bread a day? I did, and a lot of other people did. We were about 10 people in the sub-basement, men and women. There was no such thing as privacy. There was one hole that was used to get rid of our body waste. And nobody paid attention to anybody doing it. That's surviving. That's how we survived. Thank you very much for listening to my story. I really get emotional when I talk about it.
So you know what we're gonna do? Hold on to the mic. We're not done yet. Really appreciate you taking the chance, the time, the opportunity to speak to all of us. I'm wondering maybe if there's any questions for Sam, especially from the younger folks in the room. It's not often you get a chance to speak to or meet with a survivor. Where'd you come from in Poland?
I was born in the city Stanisław, which was eastern part of Poland. When the war started, Russia took the eastern part, Germany took the western part. But after a while, Germany wanted the whole Poland, so they invaded the eastern part. That's how we ended up under German occupation. And that's how they made the ghettos. Any other questions?
Any other questions? And let's just consider the fact, I mean, there's so much to unpack in everything that you just said. But you grew up from the age of, let's say, 5, you understood that life was a ghetto. You didn't have the memories of a childhood that other children would have necessarily had. What was that like?
I saw more dead people than live people. And instead of my mother said, go away from them, they're dead, she said, look and remember. And I did. It was not easy, but when you look at after a while, you would take everything into your conscience. Everything was inside me then.
Any other questions from the audience? Yeah,
Can you
Mari.
tell us the role of the Nazis, the Germans, of how they got along vis-a-vis a Jew? Was life significant to them? Could they take a gun and shoot a person by themselves?
Right.
What was the hierarchy?
What was your interaction with the Nazis and all the people that hated the Jews? What was that experience like from your perspective?
What my feeling was towards the Nazis is God would punish them eventually. When you are in a basement and you have nothing else to do except let your mind wander, what it feels like, what you're going to do, how everything is going to turn out, you think everything comes out later. And I was in the basement even today. I said to myself at one time, how could God allow something like that to happen? I had 4 years old, 5 years old children who never did anything bad in their life being killed. I said to myself, I feel like a prisoner. A prisoner has more things than I do. They had food 3 times a day. They had papers, they had television, they had everything. I had nothing. Can any of you just be like that, living with nothing? I don't know if you could, be rational after you do that.
Alan?
Yes.
So the slogan of never again is something that we all know. Question is, as a survivor, seeing the hatred and the anti-Semitism that's going on in the world, what would you recommend or say to the people, the young people of this generation, where it's rising up to protect themselves and or to help them deal with those issues?
Anti-Semitism is rising right now in the United States.
Well, we have anti-Semitism because the world is jealous of us. Look at it this way. I have a listing of how many Nobel Prizes we Jews got compared to the whole world. I also have a listing of all the medical discoveries by Jews. And the whole world is really afraid of us. We may be too powerful. You know, in South Korea, the institution, the learning institution, came out with wanting to know how come the Jews are so powerful, must be because of the studies. Therefore, they instituted in South Korea that the children should learn Kimura and Tanakh. Maybe they'll be as smart as us.
So they can go to RJJ with you. You know, after you went from Poland to Italy, then you moved to the Lower East Side, you went to RJJ. Eventually, after you graduated, you went to City College.
I went to 2 years to City College, but my father, who was already in the 80s, in the 70s, 80s, he couldn't walk much, he couldn't do much work, therefore I took over the business. In here I have two pictures. One of me as I was growing up, and the other picture is as the business prospered. I was doing pretty good for 41 years, and I had a home in Rockland County. I lived in Co-op City, New York. I had a summer home in Monticello, New York. I had a home in Florida for the winters. I did pretty well when somebody started with nothing.
And I think probably the best part was, 41 years, and business is great, but 60 years with your wife, blessed memory.
Well, I did not talk about my past for 60 years. Either I was ashamed of it, that we didn't do anything to improve it, but I would not talk about it. And I was not the only one. Many survivors did not speak on their lives as they were growing during the war times. And I presume I decided one day I have to leave a legacy to my family, to my children, to my grandchildren. Now I go to school and I speak to the children that there was such a thing as a Holocaust. Would you believe that many people in this world still believe that the world is flat, that if they keep going west, they'll fall off the cliff? And that's how they believe. And, I can't do much about their beliefs, but I try to tell the children there's no such thing.
Any other questions? Yes, Richard.
How much pride does it give you to see Jews being able to defend themselves in the Israeli Defense Forces?
Israeli Army, State of Israel, how much pride does that give you?
I was not in the army. I was supposed to be drafted in 1963 or 64. I went for my physical at Whitehall in New York City, and the captain came out and said, all right, we're going to swear you in unless there's a reason why you shouldn't go into the army. I said, I don't know if I have any reason for not going into the army. My wife is expecting, our first child. And so he said, okay, you go home. December, they send a certified letter that we say have to respond with a birth certificate. That kept me out of the army that was Kennedy at that time as president.
Okay, and shifting to the state of Israel, next week we're going to be celebrating 75 years. What do you think about that?
I was in Israel about 3 times. I was there on the March of the Living. Here I am in Poland, and believe me that land still has anti-Semitism. You feel it. When we marched between the 2 concentration camps, they had to have guards on both sides of us to make sure nobody interferes with the march. And when I went to Israel, they had dancing in every park. They had singing all over. You wouldn't believe what a difference between those 2 worlds. I recommend anybody go into Israel, stay there at least 2-3 weeks. Then you come home and you say to yourself, I'm proud to be a Jew.
It's great. We have time for one more question from the audience. Yes, Mr. Goldberg.
First of all, thank you so much for sharing your story with us and
Probably Goldberg's
overcoming your concerns and being and speaking to us as well as the young people of the community. I wanted to ask, you said you lived 18 months in the basement of a house of somebody that your father knew that worked for your father. Who were you with there, and how did you live? Where did you get your food? Were you able to go out at all at night, or you were the whole time in the basement?
While living in the basement for 18 months, where'd you get your food? What was the conditions like? Who else was with you in the basement?
We had my mother and I. When it was cold, she kept me warm with her body. We had very little heat, but we had a few blankets. We had no mattresses. We had all kinds of garbage on the floor, which was covered by blankets, and we slept on those blankets. And we had the blankets as heating. The food that we had, we used to give the lady. She used to go to the market. We used to give her a ring or a piece of jewelry or something like that. She went to the market, she sold it, and she brought us food. It reached a time that we didn't have any food at all. My mother went out to see if she could do something like that. Some lady, Polish lady, recognized my mother, and she started to scream, "There's a Jew over there." And all of a sudden, a lot of people started to chase my mother. There was one policeman, he interfered with the chase. He said, "Okay, I'll take care of it." And he took my mother away. And then when it got dark, he said, "Go ahead, go home." It was one slice of food per day. The lady used to entertain German troops upstairs. We were not supposed to talk, only in whispers. There was no such thing as privacy. That's all. I had no clothing, no nothing. One pair of shoes, which lasted me the whole winter. Anything else?
Did you ever have the opportunity to thank that woman?
Did you ever have the chance to thank that lady that hit you?
Unfortunately, what happened was that lady used to entertain the Germans troops who used to come to her house as payment. They used to bring us bread or salami or any kind of food to her. And her neighbors denounced her to the Soviets, to the Russians, and she was arrested. My mother went to the Russian commandant and she said, there was a reason why the lady did those things, so she could have food for us. And the commandant got nasty with my mother and said, what happened? Did the Germans run out of bullets? Meaning, how come she's still alive? Then she came back and she took me by the hand and we left Stanislav that day. I had no idea what happened to the lady. I was too young really to pay attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sam. You know, Sam and his wife were blessed to have 2 children, 4 grandchildren, 1 great grandchild so far, which is will be more. And what's so nice about Sam and his story is that you can hear more. He lives locally. You can have him over for Shabbos, get to know him.
Next year, when you have the same show,
We'd love to have you back. And now we're going to conclude with Mike.
You all rise, please. Molei rachamim shochem b'mroimim Dayan amanos avi yisoimim Ametzeh minufan nechona al kanfei hashvino B'malas kedoshim tohirim Ki hozar yom mazirim The Nishmos, River Boys, Alpha Israel, Anoshim, Noshim, Batal, Shenegu, Shenishchatu, Shenechniku, Shenifrefu, Shenikberu, Chayim, Al Kiddush Hashem, Kulam Kedoshim Taharim, Ubehem Narim Tzadikim, Al Zeh Halmonon Badir HaTorah Baal HaRachamim Yastirein B'Sefer Kenofa Le'olam V'yitzrog B'tzorah Chayim Es Nishmaseihem V'gan Eden Tehei Menufasam Adonai Hu Nachlasam Yizko Akedosam Nesamot Manu V'chol Yisrael Tzukosam Eretz al tefsidamo, v'yihi makom lazokom, b'zchusam yashu b'nitchei Yisrael achuzasam, v'adoshim l'svachram tamid neg Adonai yavdu l'gorolam, yavu shalom, v'yinuch al mishkavasam, v'yikumo l'ketz hayomim l'chayosam, v'noimah, amen. Please remain standing. Shemi will now lead us in the Hatikvah. Thank you all for coming. Good evening.
There's a Marav Minyan at 8:30 in the social hall. People are going to join 8:30 Marav in the social hall.